Welcome. Today we're going to jump right into the letters of three really pivotal early leaders, Peter, John, and Jude. And what's so fascinating is how their advice from way back then basically forms a timeless playbook for dealing with these core human challenges. You know, the kind of stuff every community, then and now, has to figure out.
So let's frame this whole thing with one big question. Power, love, deception. I mean, these aren't just ancient problems, right? There are problems today. So how in the world did these early leaders handle these massive, timeless challenges? Their letters, you'll see, aren't really stuffy theological books. They're much more like practical guides from people who were right there in the trenches.
All right, first up is Peter, and he faces probably the biggest test of all, the test of power.
I mean, think about it. When you picture that early Christian community, Peter's pretty much the first name that pops into your head. His influence was just enormous. And this wasn't some title that was just handed to him. It was something he earned through his incredible, natural ability to lead.
He just had this big, forceful personality, and it is absolutely no accident that in every single list of the disciples you can find, his name is always first. He then backed that up by building trust through his powerful preaching and, just really wise direction. To put it simply, he was the guy at the top.
And this is where it gets really interesting, because he's faced with a choice that anyone with influence has to make. The potential was absolutely there for him to become what the source material calls a religious bully, and that is the worst kind of bully. He totally could have used his connection to Jesus to promote himself, just wielding power for his own benefit. But the reality? He chose the exact opposite path. He chose to be a humble servant, to always put Jesus first and to embrace suffering instead of chasing prestige. And the result of making that choice? Well, the source puts it just perfectly. Peter is a breath of fresh air. And it's so true, isn't it? Seeing a leader handle that much power with that much humility, that was a rare, rare thing back then, and honestly, it's just as rare today.
Okay, so let's shift gears to our next leader, John. His challenge was a bit different. He had to unite the two most complicated ideas in all of human existence, God and love. No big deal, right?
John looked around and saw that the two things people struggle with the most, the two things they just can't seem to get right, are God and love. And if you think about it, so many of the messes we make in our own lives come from getting one or both of those things wrong.
So, what was the mistake he was seeing? Well, people were taking this kind of flawed three-step approach. First, they'd just invent their own version of God, one that was convenient for them. Step two, they'd create their own self-serving style of love. And the result of all that? A totally disconnected faith where God and love had basically nothing to do with each other.
But John's solution was both simple and just profound. Jesus unites them. He made the case that in Jesus, the true nature of God and the true meaning of love are linked together. They're linked accurately, intricately, and most importantly, you can't dissolve that link. You just can't have one without the other, period.
And that brings us to our final leader, Jude. And Jude's role is really unique. He's kind of like a spiritual diagnostician for the community, tackling these unseen threats that were coming from the inside.
Now, to really get what Jude was doing, the source uses this amazing medical metaphor. Think about physical sickness. The symptoms are usually obvious, right? A fever, a cough, some kind of pain. We know something's wrong, and we get help pretty fast. But with the spiritual sickness, the symptoms are hidden. A really dangerous virus can be spreading through a community's spiritual health, and it can go completely undetected for a very long time.
So that was Jude's role. He was a diagnostician of the spirit. What a powerful idea, right? He was the leader who could spot that dangerous, even deadly virus in the community's spiritual life, a crisis that most people didn't even know they were in.
So what was his prescription? Well, it wasn't paranoia. He wasn't telling everyone to be suspicious of each other. No, instead, he called for energetic watchfulness. It's this kind of active, alert awareness that, as the source points out, has actually prevented a whole lot of disasters throughout history.
Okay, so when you pull all this together, what you get is a set of timeless guidance that is just as relevant for any organization, any family, any community that exists today.
So let's just recap it real quick. For Peter, the big challenge was the ego of power, and his prescription was humble service. For John, it was the confusion around these huge ideas, and his solution was their unbreakable unity. And for Jude, it was the hidden danger of decay from within, and his answer was energetic watchfulness. 3 leaders, 3 different problems, 3 timeless prescriptions.
So the final point I really want to leave you with is this. These are not just history lessons. They are active, living challenges. So which of these ancient problems, the corruption of power, the confusion of our core values, or that slow, unseen decay from the inside, which one is the most urgent for our communities to face today? That is definitely something we're thinking about.